You're live, Councilor Grow.
Fantastic. Thank you and welcome to the P&D January 19th session. On the call right now, we've got Councilor Gilman, Vice Chair, Councilor O'Neill, committee member. We also have on the call Mayor Greg Berga and Councilor Tony Gross in the background there. Tom Sayas is with us from the fire department, and of course our trustee Sherry. Sherry, would you do me a favor? Is Carvelis correct?
Carvelis, correct.
I just want to make sure that I say your name properly.
Thank you.
Also on the call is Greg Cadamatori, the planning director and interim community development director. I'm going to announce here that consistent with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting will be conducted by remote participation. The public may not physically attend this meeting, but every effort will be made to allow. Oh, I lost my thing here. You went big.
Oh,
So I can't see my thing.
Okay.
There we go. You won't be allowed to be here, but every effort will be made to allow the public to view and listen to the meeting in real time and participate when necessary. If you are calling in on a phone, you may press *9 to request to speak. If you are watching on a computer or device, there is a raised hand button that you can tap or press to request to speak. Please use either of these options to be recognized to speak. And with that, I will start the agenda with the request to my committee members. Without objection, I would like to take the application of Islands End Realty Trust out of order and do it first in order to sort of get that off the table, because we've got Tom here and the meeting may go for quite a while. So any objections to that? Are the participants here? Do we know if they're here?
Yes, Councilor Grow. Adam Scott is here.
Adam Scott. Okay, Adam Scott, I take it you're the attorney?
Nope, I am the propane company representative.
That's good enough for me. All right, so we're gonna have you go ahead and speak to what your request is, and then we'll move forward on that.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks for hearing me. My name is Adam Scott with Scott Energy in Gloucester, Mass. I'm the representative for Brian Patrickin, or Islands End Realty Trust. The homeowner is building a home that is at the end of Coles Island Road. The home has a significant BTU load that calls for an exorbitant amount of gas storage. They have almost a commercial sized generator, but the biggest thing is an ice melt system that carries an extremely large BTU load, therefore exceeding the state 2001 gallons. That is what is pushing us into this meeting here. So we've put forth an application for a maximum storage of 4,000 gallons on the property. And that is pretty much it. I have met with our fire inspector, Lieutenant Tom Sayas, and gone over it. And we've started obviously the licensing process for the city.
Okay. Anything else you want to add there? Nothing. Tom, can we hear from you about what the process is here and whether or not this, I guess it's a doubling of the amount of propane normally stored, fits into your definition of safe?
Yeah.
We'll ignore the greenhouse gas effect for the moment.
Yeah, I don't know about the effect of the gas, but for the state, if you're over 2001 gallons, you have to have a special permit. Basically, it's storage of flammable material for your property. And Adam Scott and Scott Energy, they know how to, they actually reached out to me first before they even started this, talked about it. We went over it. I believe their plan is to put 4 1,000-gallon underground storage tanks. So, which is the normal, I mean, most people have one underground storage tank on their property. You could get 2 of them by right, and you wouldn't need anything. So what they're going to do is they're going to get a special permit from the fire department, and every year I'll go out and inspect it, and they'll reapply for the permit every year. We'll go check it out, make sure everything's fine. And Scott Energy is, they're right up on top of all the codes. And there hasn't been any problems with them in the past, so there shouldn't be any problem getting the permit. And like I said, every year, now every year I'll go out and inspect it, and it'll be actually probably safer than most people's home ones, because we only inspect it when they install them.
Do we have any questions from the committee members? Councilor Gilman?
Yeah, thank you, Tom and Adam. I appreciate it. So I do have a question about the location of this. Is it in the coastal floodplains or not? Is it up closer to the home?
I believe, I don't know if they have the exact location yet, but I know the house sits up on the plain on Coles Island. Adam might have better.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so the planned location for the tanks are actually on the opposite side, so the upside of the land. So the house would be between the ocean and the tank locations. One good thing to bring up too is water suppression is always a very important factor with flammable materials. So there is a fire hydrant that is actually within 100 yards of the property. So that's important to know.
Great, thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, Councilor O'Neill, do you have anything to ask?
No, I don't.
Okay.
And in the counselors, I've talked to the Chief Smith about it, and he's agreeable with it. Everything is fine. We're gonna put in the permits. Scott will have all the specs there. I'll be there when they're doing it before they bury it, and we should be good. We should be fine.
Yeah, and one last thing too, actually the neighbor, the Patrickins' father has 4 1000s on his property as well.
Right. It's
And
just, one of the reasons is because they're way out in the end of the road. There's no gas in the street over there. And instead of putting oil tanks, this is probably a, better alternative.
Can you speak to, are there any specific safety issues to having 4 tanks as opposed to 2?
Well, no, you actually, it may even be safer because I have to come and inspect them every year. So, you could put 2 on your property and I look at them when they go in, and then that's it. We don't look at them again until they take them out. So with having more than 2, it actually gets inspected a lot more.
So just out of curiosity, Mr. Scott, the house is under production, being built right now.
Correct.
What would be the contingency if this didn't get passed by the council?
So they would, well, the generator is one big one that is the major load, but the snow melt system, that's 1.8 million BTUs, which is a very large amount of heating that's needed. So yeah, they would have to go back to the drawing board on a few things. So
Is it usual to come this late in the game to get something like this approved? But why wouldn't it have been done during the permitting process or through the building inspector's office at the time?
it's a fair question.
Yeah, I don't know. They haven't even just started building the building now. So it's still in the process. Maybe from what I think is they didn't know how much they were going to use until it was starting to go, I guess.
And just because I'm ignorant in these issues, 1.8 million BTUs, what does that mean? And what's it in how would you
Yeah.
weigh that in relation to something else?
Yeah, I'll give you, so the average home, so 2,500 square foot home, probably to heat the house is 100,000 BTUs. So
For how long? What is that? For
Oh,
what time period?
so 100,000 BTUs is, so BTUs is it's your measurement of heat.
Right.
So 100,000 BTUs is just what it takes to heat a home in like per hour.
per hour.
Yeah, per hour.
Okay. So this would use 1.8 million BTUs per hour just for the ice melting system
Correct.
and not necessarily, and will the rest of the house be powered with propane for everything else?
Correct.
Okay. So, okay. So they're going to need a heating system to go up there as well with that.
Yep. Yeah, the heating system, the ice melt is just another section of the actual heating system itself.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all the questions I have for now. I'm glad to be educated on this because it's something I don't have any understanding of prior to this. If there's nothing else, I'll have Val read the committee recommendation.
Okay, great. And then after, in the discussion, we can talk about the date of the public hearing.
Mhm.
So Planning and Development Committee votes to recommend that the city council grant a license under GCO Chapter 8 Fire Prevention and Protection, Section 8-1, license for storing inflammables, MGL Chapter 148, Section 13, and 527 CMR number 1 for storage of inflammables at 132 Coles Island Road, Assessor's Map 259, Lot 7, owner Islands End Realty Trust, specifically to store 4,000 gallons of propane in number 4, 1,000 gallon ASME UG containers with the following condition: that said 4,000 gallon ASME UG containers be used for the exclusive use of 132 Coles Island Road, and I so move.
That's your cue,
Second.
Tracy.
Second.
Okay. All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? No? No
No.
motion? Okay, well then we'll talk about very quickly the public hearing. Following the vote, this will be referred to the city council. And we have a date for the public hearing of February 8th. Sherry, am I right on that? Okay, so that would appear on the, so without any discussion, the only thing I would say is I'm a little boggled by the 1.8 million BTUs and the accompanying carbon footprint that entails, which is a little disconcerting to me, but I'm happy to move this forward to the city council for further discussion in the public hearing. So with a roll call vote, we'll go ahead and call the vote. Councilor Gilman,
Yes.
Councilor O'Neill,
Yes.
Councilor Grow says yes. So there we are. It will go to City Council on February 8th for the public hearing. And I believe that, Adam, if you could bring this information back to the applicant, they're responsible for the advertising costs and alerting the neighbors of the public hearing and the butters and the butters of abutters and all that. So you can make sure that they understand that so that they have the advertisement in place in time for the public hearing.
Excellent. Yeah, Sherry, pass that along. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Good. All right. Thank you very much for coming. And Tom, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. And you guys Sherry can give me a invitation. I can be at the full meeting too.
We
I
can
can be available.
It'll be
if you need
a
me.
really nice invitation too,
Yeah.
one of those embossed
Yeah,
ones.
I know. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you
Have a
very
nice
much,
night.
Have a
Bye.
good evening.
Have a good evening, Mr. Scott. Okay.
Bye.
So this leads us to our current fun topic of the month, which is the rezoning 2021-003. And do I need to read that whole thing? Do I?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. In accordance with GZO section 1.11.2A, amend GZO sections 2.3.1 residential uses, 3.2 dimensional table, 3.2.2 dimensional requirements for multifamily dwellings and their accessory uses other than signs, and 3.1.6B, building heights in excess of 35 feet. This is continued from the last meeting, the 1/5/22 meeting, at which we engaged in the presentation by Planning Director, Community Development Director Interim Catabatori, who gave us a presentation on the proposal and what the impacts are proposed to be. Then we solicited questions from city councilors and the public to be synthesized and delivered to Mr. Catamatore for him to consider and offer some remarks on them. And then I think for tonight, depending on how things go and sort of the appetite of the committee, we may engage further question taking from the counselors and from the public, as long as we maintain that this is question time. And again, really, really warning people that this is not the time to make your big statement. Okay, while it will be there recorded, those are really reserved for the full city council public hearings, and they will have their best bang for the buck at that point. If we do get down to questions, I'm going to really, really hope that we keep things down to the 5 W's and the H: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And that way we can do is our job of edifying the community about what the issues are, what the concerns are. Also, when we get to that point, if you have heard your question answered, okay, it's answered. Let's move on to the next one. Let's not keep repeating ourselves with the same thing, because we're just going to bog ourselves down with lots of repetitive stuff. I mean, it's really important, I think, for people to have a good understanding of what's going on. And I really am looking forward to hearing from new people on the list. So I think that's the way we're going to take it and see how it goes. So without any further ado, we're going to turn it over to Greg Catamatore to address the questions that were asked last session and see where we go from there. Mr. Catamatore.
Good evening,
stage is
counselors.
yours.
I think I heard a few things, not only through the comments that were provided to me from Sherry. Thank you for that. I also took them down myself and duplicated the effort. And also, I've also received a few things over the course of the couple of weeks. It's amazing. It's been 2 weeks via email as well. And so what I'm hoping to do is to provide a brief presentation that will answer a lot of those questions. Also provide some additional information that I hope will clarify things. Again, there's definitely been a lot of comment about sweeping change, affordability, a lot of different things that I think need to be clarified. And again, we can only be as predictive as we can in terms of what actually happens when things are modified. So if I can share my screen, I'm just going to have a presentation, similar model of how I did this 2 weeks ago. So meeting of this evening, the 19th. So I'm just going to go over a couple of clarifying things around the proposal so that everybody understands it. I think in many cases, the clarification will probably not change opinions, but I just want to make sure that everybody's clear in terms of what's being proposed. I will respond to some of the general comments and questions that were forwarded to me. I'm going to provide a little bit of a history of two-family in Gloucester because I think it's rather enlightening. And I also think we're clearly having the right discussion because I think city councils have probably discussed how we treat two-family at least, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 times in the last 4 decades, and have come out with different responses expressed through the zoning ordinance over that same period. Talk a little bit more about a summary of the build out and what it means in terms of potential, the current potential that's there right now for unit development in single and two family in the residential districts, and what essentially is the increased potential by these proposals. And then close out just with some clarity on building height and also building height in the region, because I know there are a few comments about that as well. So these are kind of just, there was a question and here are some of the responses. So try to make it very clear that each of these proposals is not designated solely to create affordable housing. There's been a lot of comment around affordability around the housing production plan. And how does this relate to affordability? And I am not suggesting, I don't think the planning board was suggesting, or anybody that's been working on these efforts, that each one of these is going to impact deed restricted affordable housing. It will affect housing supply. And I don't think anyone is really suggesting that they have a solution to the shortage of housing that is reflected in the market price at this point. So this was, again, the housing production plan, which the city elected to conduct, not required. There's no contract, there's no agreement, there's nothing that holds us to anything other than providing us some options in a certain permitting framework if we hit certain targets of affordable housing. If we don't, there is no change. If we do, yay, we've created affordable housing in the same time period that's available for folks that are living in Gloucester and also folks that are in need of affordable housing. So the housing production plan, while it is a tool that specifically addresses subsidized housing in a community, we expanded that very deliberately to look at what are the needs across markets. And so that's why there's varying proposals, some which you've already seen recently enacted, some that have already been on the books, programs that we already have, including through the grants division that specifically address affordable housing, but then also things that are proposed to increase supply and also potentially that meet what we heard from people back in 2017 in terms of the types of options that they might want to pursue. Any lot that currently complies with two-family requirements, if there's a structure on it right now, it can be torn down and a new two-family could be constructed. That is the way that this ordinance is functioning right now, where it provides an added review process for conversions that have exterior modification, and I'll use those terms a lot. So if a single family wants to convert to a two-family and it's going to expand the footprint, that requires a special permit. But if I have a lot that's undeveloped, vacant, that meets all the dimensional requirements in all of the multifamily, in all of the residential districts, with the exception of the RC40 out on Eastern Point, I can build a two-family. I have a single family in any one of those districts, I meet the requirements, I can tear it down and build a two-family. But if I have a single family in one of those districts and comply with all the requirements, but I'm going to modify the footprint and require a special permit. So that's really one of the main kind of issues of this. And when I go through the history of two-family, the opinions of the councils at the time have changed back and forth. There were times when all two families required a special permit, and there were times when every type, including conversions, were allowed with a building permit and nothing further. The housing production plan addresses affordability in a variety of ways. You know, people again are saying these aren't doing anything about affordability. Why aren't we focusing on affordability? And the variety of ways includes the CDBG programs that we administer that provide assistance for housing rehabilitation for income eligible households. We have a first-time home buyers program for folks that meet income guidelines. And we also have other abilities to utilize those funds to support affordable housing projects. We have an inclusionary ordinance that requires market rate development projects to include affordable units within them. And that was just amended last year to dial it to Gloucester's income levels, to make sure that units are created, are more available to households in Gloucester that are in need of affordable housing. The ADU ordinance that was passed, again, has restriction on size of units. Again, there's not the suggestion that those units are going to be affordable units, but they will add rental units to the market. There is a restriction that they cannot be rented for less than 30 days. So we're trying to create that year-round rental market. And because of their size, 900 square feet, typically a one-bedroom, maybe something that's more little a affordable in the Gloucester market because of that accessory use to a single family lot, not just an Airbnb, because again, we have that restriction on it has to be rented for at least 30 days. And then partnering with nonprofit housing groups, the city has funding, both the Affordable Housing Trust has funds. They've exhausted most of their funds at this point because of the projects they've supported, as well as we have Community Preservation Act funding that committee also has the ability to help fund affordable housing projects. So those are some of the other things that are being done on the affordable front. Big, bold, these amendments are entirely within the city council's control. Again, there is no commitment to pass one, all, any of these amendments. It's entirely up to you to decide. Again, MAPC provided support in the development of a local plan that was, again, developed with local input. We made the decisions collectively, what went into the housing production plan, and whether we move forward on each of those is entirely also a local decision. So now there's actually proposals that were a result of that planning process, and they're solely for the city council to decide whether they are enacted. The only increase in the potential for two-family is by reduction in the lot area requirements in the R30, 40, and 80, and the allowance in the RC40. And I'll present this graphically and also in tables. And I just continue to stress that somebody can convert a single family to a two-family tomorrow with a building permit if they comply with the requirements, as long as they don't modify the exterior of the structure. So in terms of the number of potential new dwelling units that are out there, not much changes except for the reduction in the lot area, the doubling in the R30, 40, and 80 district, and the very limited potential that's availed by creating a special permit process in the RC40. So that potential number is very small in terms of the number of potential units that are created by this. It's the process by which that they're created, which is really the issue. And again, it's been back and forth for 4 decades. At times, you could just pursue with a building permit, at other times with a special permit. And now we have this hybrid where we're treating the same use differently, where you can tear down, build new, but if you modify a structure, you need a special permit. Again, a lot of the discussion about affordability, the only way to secure affordability is through deed restriction. The city has over 1,000 units of subsidized housing. Units are being added through our inclusionary process of housing development, also through those other programs that I identified in the CDBG program, as well as nonprofits that we've partnered with. So a little history of two-family. I did research the past zoning ordinances and the history of how two-family has been treated. Back in the 60s and 70s and even prior to, we had very few zoning districts. They were very broad. We actually had a multifamily district at one point that, further multifamily, like we're talking about with the proposal in R5 was allowed. Through that period and over time, we've certainly tightened up on the allowance of housing. It is what it is. We've gone from increasing lot size requirements to adding special permits for certain uses. Not suggesting that there isn't appropriate times for having that, but just pointing out in the history, particularly with two-family, we've really vacillated on how we treat two families. So by the early 80s, every type of two-family in all of these districts, other than RC40, it was not called RC40 at the time, but the boundaries have changed a little bit over time. All of two-family use was only by special permit. The allowance by right for both new and conversions between the 1989 edition of the zoning ordinance and the 1993 ordinance. It's possible that I don't have a copy of another revision in the interim. All of the use of two-family was allowed by right by amendment to the zoning ordinance. And then we went through a period of 6+ years where it was allowed. And then there was a reintroduction of the special permit only for conversions with exterior change in 1998, in December 8th. So, which brings us right back to, I guess we're having the right discussion because it's been talked about a lot back and forth. The current ordinance, again, allows the tear down or new construction or conversions without exterior change and requires special permit for conversion with exterior change. So that's really kind of the crux of it. Again, from the consistency perspective, within a district, two families should be treated the same. So whether that's all by special permit, conversions, tear downs, new construction on vacant lots, or by right, and the proposal is to allow that by right. So that's a little history on two family. I did receive one request from a counselor on looking a little bit more about, what's the activity level. And I think this is kind of an important one to consider when we talk about potential. And I'll present that graphically and also in tables. There's a lot of numbers. It's a little bit complicated. But this is what we've seen from 2018 to the present. We have seen the conversion of 1 to 2 families 47 times, and has resulted in 47 new units, because again, there was a single to begin with. This is based on the building permit data and input, in terms of what is the change of use or what type of permitting process has occurred to create these units. 8 new 2 families, which would result in 16 units. So that's a vacant lot that may or may not have needed some sort of relief. That's one of the other things that's a little bit more difficult, that I'm working with the building department to try to be able to tease out more information, whether any of those needed relief. Again, of those 47, when there's a conversion, again, if it was within the interior without any addition, it's possible that it didn't require anything other than the building permit. If it was with exterior change, then it would have required some zoning board activity. We've seen 11 2 to 3 family conversions, again, resulting in 11 units because of just one is added per structure. And then finally, 4 1 family to 3 family conversions, resulting in 8 units. So I'm going to next show you what the potential is out there. And that's one of those numbers that I think is, it's certainly a large number. It can be alarming for folks, but that is there right now. It is a matter of process. Somebody can build a single family, somebody can build a new 2 family, somebody can make these conversions by special permit processes, and also identifying that the special permit process is a conditional use permit. It's not saying that this is something that's not allowed. It's saying that you may have to apply with different or increased standards, but it is an allowance. So that's what I've used myself, and also Gemma Wilkins, who has done a lot of this analysis based on all the data that we have in our assessors database, to give a sense of what this looks like and what the impact is of these proposed changes. So here is a plot of by district on the x-axis. So we have R5, R10, 20, 30, 40, RC 40, and 80, and then units of potential. And 2 colors right now, based on the zoning ordinance in the red, is what there is for potential by district. And this is in through the lens of it's what's allowed by right. And the reason why these numbers are fairly large is because, again, vacant lots could potentially have 2 family or single family. And so we've gone with kind of the maximum potential. And those conversions can happen right now if somebody wanted to modify an existing structure. So when we talk about dwellings or units, that potential in some of these districts, there is no change. What would potentially change is whether or not those structures could be modified. So you can see clearly, and I'll start just with R10 and then go back to R5. In the R10 and the R20 district, this is essentially the number of structures that could potentially convert. And there is no change. It's just a matter of process in terms of whether somebody would have the ability to then modify and also just continue to pursue a building permit. As we go to R30, 40, and 80, the resulting change between what could potentially happen right now and what can happen with these proposed changes enacted is a function of that reduction in the doubling of the lot size requirement for a 2 family. So there's 59 lots right now that can convert from a 1 to 2 without any exterior modification. And because of that reduction in lot size, there are some lots that don't have 60,000 square feet in the R30 district, or don't have 2 acres in the R40 or 4 acres in the R80. And so you see those slight differences. So from a potential perspective, based on the 2-family discussion, we're looking at about 100 units that potentially are new potential associated with these changes. And then when we go to the R5, obviously it's a little bit more dramatic because of we've looked at the number of singles, the number of 2s that could potentially convert, and the multiplier is there obviously, because if you go from a 1 to a 3, you're adding 2 units. And so that added potential is 548. But I go back to all totaled, this potential of housing that again, and there are plenty of limitations that will restrict this potential of housing when I go into the caveats of what's included in the analysis and the constraints that are not included in the analysis. We're talking about 2,300 units that right now have the potential to be created. There's about 100 more that are being added across those most of the residential districts, excluding the R5. And what we saw over that 3.5-year period was 82 units. So clearly, when you look at these large numbers of potential, every single one of those units is based on someone deciding to want to pursue adding a unit, whether somebody's in a single family that wants to add a 2 or try to convert to a 3. And they're all real estate decisions, whether somebody decides to make the investment in their property or sell their property and somebody else tries to do the same. So to give you a sense, this is a very busy table. We just to also kind of show you, why that potential isn't greater, because I think a lot of folks are saying, oh, well, that means every lot can do these types of things without any review or any relief. So in the first column, the first column is zoning district. Second column is the total number of lots in those districts. And then we have this column compliant lots. And it clearly demonstrates that for the standards for 1 and 2 family, most districts really have very few, not few, but a very small percentage, sometimes, less than 10% of the lots that actually comply with the dimensional requirements for the district. So the difference between total lots and compliance lots kind of gives you a sense of nonconformity of lots that would require some additional review process if they were to pursue a 2-family conversion at this case, or even a new 2-family because it doesn't comply. And then as we go across the columns, 1 and 2 family conversions, again, because again, there's some further limitation from the compliant lots to the ability to convert. And then new 2 family, again, is that kind of added potential that could happen because of the allowance of as of right conversion. So these are those numbers similar to what you saw graphically in the total potential. And again, not a lot of that changes other than in the larger lot districts because of that reduction in the lot area requirement. And I just have an asterisk here on the RC40. There appear to be 11 lots that would comply, but there is no as of right allowance for 2-family. It would be allowed by special permit. So the current potential number of units in the RC40 would be single families at this point at 11. Again, this is just kind of a summary of what is used to try to get at the potential build out or yield. It's based on having adequate frontage, lot area, minimum lot area, which can include more than 25% wetland, and land use codes that we analyzed, either vacant parcels or parcels that had a single family that have the potential to convert to a 2. What was excluded from the analysis is conservation land, city land, utility owned land, and it doesn't even consider other constraints that could exist: topography of the lot, ledge, Title V requirements, utility limitations, or whether there's any other private deed restrictions or easements.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Why is the compliant, so on the first line, R10, compliant lots is 909,
yep.
and then the conversion and the two-family total potential units is 960. Okay, never mind. I got it.
Yeah, so it's a sum.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
So
not
if you
the
have a
total
new
lots, it's
two,
the
yeah,
total
so
units.
what I didn't put it in is the multipliers.
Yep.
Um,
My
yeah.
apologies. Thank you.
no problem. It's,
If I could just piggyback on that very quickly, why is R5 not represented in this chart?
because that's the next slide.
Yay, all right, go. All right,
So
Oh.
again, I tried to, the heading on this was really the potential of two-family use and allowance. So I've kind of summarized those districts. R5 obviously right now has as of right across the board for every type of two-family that can happen right now, whether it's a conversion, a new construction. So that's kind of a different category that we're talking about, the three-family, and there we are. So the R5 district, again, using those same criteria of frontage area, minimum lot area, wetland, and land use code of vacant or single family, and those same exclusions. And again, every parcel needs, would need a site-specific analysis as to whether or not there's really potential there. One of the big limiters, not for the R5 district per se, but clearly the R30, 40, and 80 is septic capacity. So many of those may not have the potential that's shown, but again, it's based. Just want to be clear what the analysis is based upon. So there's 2,183 lots in the R5 district. There's 791 that are greater than 5,000 square feet with 500 feet of frontage that either have a single family home on them or they're vacant. And this kind of carries you through. There's 371 that have a single that could be converted potentially to a 3-unit building. There are 102 two families that could be converted to a 3. And there's actually 5 lots that appear to be meet that criteria that potentially could have new construction of a 3-family based on if this proposal is accepted. So again, the multiplier out, 2 times 317, adding 1 for 102 and adding 3 for the 5 gets you to 875. So that's the impact of the potential as of right use of 3-family in the R5 district. I might want to pause there before I go into building height or whatever you'd like. I can connect.
I think we can, I think it's a good idea if we allow, we'll limit this to council questions from the committee at this point, but any clarifications that need to be made up to this point?
Oh,
I
Councilor
have a
Gilman?
question. So can we go back to that slide on R5?
Yep.
Yeah, let's just
So
keep that
seeing
up.
that has the most change in terms of units that would be affected. Would you just describe where in Gloucester that is, the R5 downtown? That would be very helpful for people that aren't familiar with what
Sure.
district are
I'm
R5.
going to share something different. I think. Hold on 1 second. Too many windows open.
And council, while we're waiting, I just want to let people know that Council Memhard is also on the call. So we now have a quorum of the full city council.
Are you seeing that?
We are.
Yes.
Okay. So the R5 district. Oh, really slow. Waiting it to Zoom. Wow. We got to talk to the IT director.
Get them on the line right now.
Okay, so everything that's in kind of this really dark orange in the downtown core between 128 and essentially Main Street area. So all of this area is the R5 district. And then I can put up the slide again if you'd like.
Let's do that. Yeah.
yes, please.
So any questions on this specific part of the presentation, Councilor Gilman, Councilor O'Neill?
Can you put up the slide before, yeah, that's the one. Thank you. I just want to take a picture of it so that I
I'll send the full presentation to the council after this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
There's a lot of numbers in there, and so clearly want people to have the opportunity to take a look at them.
Val, did you have any questions?
No, I'm finding this presentation to be very helpful. So
Okay.
thank you.
Tracy, do you have any questions?
No, I think, yes, Craig, you're doing a great job. Thank you so much. I spent quite a bit of time with, talking with Sean Henry this afternoon. So, this presentation is fantastic
Okay,
and, it's sinking in. So thank you.
sure.
Do you have
appreciate
any
it.
questions or no? Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, all right. Well,
All right.
I do actually, if we could, just very quickly. I just want you to reiterate, if you could, the issue of conformity, and I think your chart says this pretty clearly, but not every property in every district is going to be eligible to these changes, and that any property that is non-conforming in any way is going to have to go through the ZBA process. Is that correct?
Yes, so, that, and you can go back and take a look at that, and I would say that that column in both instances that says compliant is based on, the number of variables that we are knowns that we can apply to the assessor's database, to our GIS database. There are other factors that will certainly, limit that number further. But that's typically the type of stuff that gets, fleshed out, through evaluating a specific property. Any number of things, floodplain issues. We try to actually remove as many of those as possible by screening out, making sure that, each lot was compliant with the district also from a wetland allowance perspective. But there are, things, other impediments to development that aren't a part of this analysis that, so it's fairly conservative. And one of the other important ones that I didn't include in the footnote, so maybe I'll change that, is it also doesn't consider whether the structure on the lot is compliant. So, again, what we're talking about is the use of the property. If the structure doesn't comply, the lot complies, but the structure doesn't, that also requires some form of a variance if the use was pursued. And it's just not something that, we don't have the accuracy to be able to do some sort of analysis of the location of the building on the lot and whether it complies with setbacks. A little bit, we just don't have the data sources to be able to do it. Can it be done? Sure. If everyone gave us a very accurate survey of their property and that was all knitted together, we could do that analysis. But so that's another limitation that would require, again, a subset of those compliant lots would be able to literally convert, come in with a building permit, show that they comply with all the dimensional requirements, the parking requirements, and those types of things to be able to pursue it.
So just because I tend to need to recap things, lots and buildings have to be conforming. That is the potential, barring any problems with Title V, with lot placement, any of the conditions that weren't considered, means that the true potential is less, right?
Yes.
We can have more potential with requirements. So we're talking about, that's the absolute maximum that we could be looking at with these changes. And the reality is that it also requires the desire and the property owners to all do this in order to make those changes.
Correct.
Okay, all right. I think I'm good for now. The one question I did want to ask you was that so in 3 years, we produced 82 new units in the multifamily or two-family thing. What is the housing plan, production plan estimate is the number that we should be targeting in order to keep up with our needs?
So at the time, I believe the number was probably about 435. And the snapshot that was, I'd have to pull that back out. And I think I showed you in the last slide, more of a 10-year look of how we've been developing number of units from 1 and 2 family, and then also multifamily developments. It looks like according to the census, that number is fairly consistent at about 1,000 over a 10-year period. Just to give you a sense of development rates. But that demand piece, there are a variety of models of housing demand. And it's interesting that when we looked at the same, if you look at the housing production plan, the predictions around population were less than were realized. And there are other models that have been created, using a lot of factors, particularly from transportation demand perspective from like DOT, that would have had us hit 33,000. So, that number of demand is a tough one to put a finger on. But over that period, they were looking at, multifamily in particular, and we've produced about 230 units since the creation of the plan, and I believe the number was around 435. That was really more of the focus around the affordable housing aspect of the housing production plan. The 1 and 2 family, again, I think that the demand is very high, and that was also reflected from what we heard from people in that process of wanting to try to find opportunities for creating housing for local people. Again, it doesn't always play out that way. That's clear. There's also folks that are developers of 2 family, and those are being occupied. So,
All right, let's go on with the next part of the presentation. If we could.
okay.
Counselor, can I just interject for a second? Counselor
Worthley
Worthley
is
on the
on
call,
call,
as
yeah.
well as Frank Majota is also
You
on
didn't
the
pop
call.
up on my list. Okay.
Whoops, sorry, should have started from the slide. I only have a couple left. There were some questions about how is, because we forgot, there's a whole discussion about height.
We haven't forgotten, Greg. We have not forgotten.
So how building height is calculated. This will again will be available for anybody that wants the presentation. You can make it available through the council website. This is a direct excerpt from the zoning ordinance itself in terms of how it's calculated, what's included, what's excluded. But yeah, just that clarity of, and I mentioned this before, that it's a little bit complicated because it does consider every corner of the building. It's not just 4 corners of the building. It depends on the shape of a structure, whether it has bay windows that have a foundation supporting it. So it's a little bit complicated. It's something that's reviewed by the building office, but it's the average grade of all the corners of the pre-existing measured to the height of the roof. And there's modifications and clarifications for roof type and also for other types of mechanicals and things that would protrude from a structure. I heard a question at the very end or a comment about characterization of communities that have differing height limitations. I can also forward this a recent study that basically did a pretty deep statistical analysis of zoning codes, looking at everything from lot size, height, all sorts of dimensional requirements, and tried to provide some sort of summary of those or cataloging of them, and also some recommendations on what might be restrictive based on the regional housing demand. So again, this is not the color choice that I would choose, not because I don't like the color pink, but it should be I wish it was contrasting a little bit more in terms of the different categories rather than a color ramp like this. So there we are, Gloucester, in that, again, 10 to 30 foot range. I think they lumped both accessory and principal structure allowed. So again, there's a lot of variety across the greater Boston area. There was mention, I know I saw a letter submitted to the council with places outside of Massachusetts, South Shore, Newburyport and other communities that have requirements. Marblehead in particular has a differing height limitation across districts, more proximate to the coastline. They have a lower restriction. So again, there's no right or wrong. Each community gets to decide. This has also been discussed by past councils back and forth. There was a point where it was 35 feet and it was reduced to 30. There was a period where it wasn't even clear who would offer relief if relief was requested. So with this proposal of 35, there's also a comment of then people will ask for that much more. That's the decision of the council. If you set the ceiling at 35, you have the purview for reviewing anything greater that and can decide whether that's allowed or not. So that's, again, there's a lot of variability. I think there's some principal issues that people are presenting. Nobody is right or wrong. It is the rule of the land right now that it's 30 feet. Does it create some additional capacity for multifamily in particular? Yes. Does it provide some accommodation for structures that might need to elevate? Yes. And then there's also opinions of folks that that's fine, but let's continue to have the review process that we have. And I think in the last presentation, I provided some of what we could tease out from the zoning board's decisions on the likelihood of relief that has been granted between that 30 to 35 feet with a high instance of that occurring. And then again, anything beyond that is reviewable by the council. So that's what I have for comments or some clarification based on the questions that were coming in from the last meeting.
Okay. Do we want to address any questions on this, Councilor Gilman?
Yeah, can you go back to the height chart?
Yep.
Greg, if you don't mind.
You see that?
Back to the definition of the calculation. Okay. So let's just hypothetically say that the four corners of a flat roof are all 30 feet. And there's but the roof makes it 35 feet. The peak of the roof makes it 35 feet. What would the calculation be for that house? So all four corners are 30 feet and the peak of the roof is 35.
Yeah, so that's essentially what basically it sets the plane that it's measured from, and then it's based on that definition. It's the highest point of the roof.
So that permit would be 35 feet.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to, I know that that's been a common question that I've had from my constituents, and I just wanted to get your confirmation on that. Thank you.
Sure.
Councilor O'Neill, you have any questions on height?
Yes, I'm reading the second sentence. In the case of a sloping roof, the vertical distance measured from the average grade prior to building construction. So that's the average grade of the property of the land?
So, yeah, so that second point is clarifying how that average grade is calculated.
Right.
So it's basically before any construction, if it's new construction, you will basically have your building design of basically in two dimensions. What does that look like? Each of those points, the elevation of where that kind of rectangle hits the ground is ascertained, and then it's the average of those that sets that point where you're going to measure from.
You good with that?
No, my internet.
Sorry, I just totally froze.
Yeah. Oh, was it yours or was it mine?
I think it was mine. I'm not sure.
All right.
No,
Was it me or
I
you?
think we heard you, Greg, but why don't you go ahead and repeat
Okay.
that a little
All right.
bit?
So you want me to repeat?
Yes.
Okay, well, maybe we should have Bill Sanborn come to the next meeting so he can show you how this gets done, because I don't do it for a living, but essentially you would, here, I'll turn this off so that I don't think we need the definition anymore for the moment. You know, essentially, you know, someone will, if it's a vacant property that's being proposed to be developed, someone will come in with their architectural plans and their site plan. Each of the corners of the proposed building, where it would sit on the property, the elevation of that location is ascertained. And then the average of all of those points is made, and that creates the plane from which the height of the building gets measured.
Okay,
So it can be complicated on a property that slopes. You
right,
know, you might have 10, 10, 20, 20, and then your
Right.
average will be 15. If it
Got
were a
it.
rectangular box, and then from that point you would measure, so the back of the building might look taller than the front.
right. Okay, so that was the question. Thank you.
Counselor Gilman, you got anything else?
No?
No? Counselor
Answered my
O'Neill?
question. Thank you.
Good.
Good.
Greg, can you speak to the current, I mean, barring going out and measuring every building in Gloucester, the prevalence of buildings that are already above the 30-foot level and where they are in the city? I mean,
I wish I could. We do have, and this is something that I you know, we can try to figure out a little bit better. So when we did the flyover in 2011, and all the things that you can see on MapGeo and are in our GIS, many of those features were basically digital aerial photo interpretation. They also used LiDAR, which is a way of measuring elevation. So there is data about buildings, but it's very difficult because of the resolution, how accurate it may be. So, I mean, we looked at a couple of examples and provided some, you know, it's a tough one. I mean, but again, I think that the challenge is, you know, I suppose we could put two images up with the known elevation of two structures, and we could do a test and see if people can really tell the difference between the two. There's a lot of factors that go into, you know, how people kind of perceive buildings and height and massing. It's very possible that, you know, one building at 30 feet could look taller than a building at 35, depending upon how much articulation of the roof line there is, whether it's a flat roof, those types of things. You know, and we've gone through a period where there was allowance of 35, and we also didn't have as many restrictions on height, you know, further back. So I think many of the structures probably in the downtown area with a full third floor, and some of them with 10-foot ceilings on ceiling height on the first floor, are probably greater than 30 feet. But I don't have a number for you in terms of you know, what percentage.
is it safe to say that there are 35-foot houses throughout the city already in existence?
I think there are, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, there are instances with new construction. I know that were presented to the zoning board. You know, you know, part of their consideration for height is the shape and topography of, you know, and the specific features of the property and how they relate to construction, and whether or not that, you know, a strict interpretation is somehow impacting that ability to construct what somebody's looking for. And those have been granted on new construction. So I'm certain that we have structures that were less regulated in the past that are greater than 30. And even new ones that have been allowed by exception from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and even beyond 35 feet in residential construction that's been allowed by the council.
We haven't touched on it tonight in this particular presentation, but could you recap the 45-foot discussion along the central business district, and what that actually means in terms of which sides of which streets are being affected, and what it means to go to 45 feet and or above. There's some concern that had been made that we were authorizing, or we were going to let 60-foot buildings and higher going out there, but can we just nail that one down?
Yeah, so this again is the zoning map, and we've been talking about the Main Street District, the Central Business District, and this yellow area, the Civic Center District. Those again are locations where there are already structures that are approaching 40 to 45 feet. I also provided the examples of projects that have recently been permitted that would fall right about in that 45-foot height. Again, many of the, you've gone through kind of aesthetic kind of not testing, but showing buildings that in the downtown area to folks in past processes. There are certain ones that I think people gravitate to, a lot of detail, a lot of taller ceiling height on the first floor, which is typical for display and for restaurant and that type of thing, with a lot of glass in the front. And then two or three story above puts you into that height range. The redevelopment of the Cameron's building is a perfect example with multi-story above the retail first floor. Again, the potential redevelopment of the downtown Y. So it's kind of affording that, that ability to have flexibility in ceiling height, because if you were to do it on a strict, 10-foot height, you end up with spaces that are kind of dark, because a lot of those buildings are longer. So, I think there's both an element of, what type of development, might occur in the downtown area. We've seen some examples of what that looks like with residential above. And it is limited to, those two districts. If there is any consideration for height in excess of that, there's been a modification to section 3.1.6. It doesn't really change the fact that the city council has always been the authority that would review anything over 35 feet. In that district, undoubtedly, I think the council would review in the way the ordinance is currently set up, just about any project in the downtown area that would involve anything more than 3 dwelling units. And in which case, what it would do is it gives basically, an initial ceiling, that 45 feet for someone to design within, but you would still be the reviewer of the use permit and the project as a whole. But I think it kind of sends a message of the types of buildings that, people gravitate to in the downtown area, with residential above. That's something that we've always been promoting in potential reuse because of a housing need that we have, and also locating housing in proximity to amenities. We've got a planning board member. We've got plenty of people that live in that area that have that ability to oftentimes walk more than drive. They have access to the train, which is less than a half mile away. So it's basically just looking at that prototypical, is that height acceptable for entering into the permitting process, but not starting at a height of 30 feet.
Would the expectation be that those would facilitate the creation of residential units, or could those units be used for office space or other sorts of business use?
They could, I mean, the district allows a lot of different type of use. I think, office use demand is a real question right now. And whether or not, that's something that somebody would pursue. Housing is definitely in need. And that, certainly when folks have talked about, properties, there's obviously a few that are vacant and for sale. There are other challenges to residential use. Everybody needs a window. And some of these properties have a lot of depth to them. So there's some limitations there in terms of how somebody might look at some of these properties. for residential use on upper story. But that's clearly, probably an option that people would be looking to pursue. As we've seen two housing projects in the last couple of years that have, again, I think the Y was a little bit of an exception because of the senior housing nature and trying to fit a need around senior affordable. It's also not in the main stretch of Main Street that typically has something that's more public facing or, has some translation to people, the pedestrian utilizing the first floor. But we certainly see a desire to pursue additional housing in the downtown area.
Just out of curiosity, one of the comments that always seems to come up is that these proposals are going to allow for outside developers to develop properties for outside people to come into Gloucester. Welcome Jamie O'Hara, by the way, on the call here, another counselor. Do you have any estimates of, that was especially prominent in the Halyard development. Do you have any estimates of how many units in the Halyard project were occupied by Gloucester residents versus people from outside Gloucester?
I can tell you, as we've been engaged with the management company as they've been filling out, having those units get rented. I believe there's only, they are 99.5% or 99% fully occupied. I think there's one unit that remains to receive its first tenant. And in the mix at different points in time, I kind of wanted to understand that a little bit better. And I think a better part of more than a third of the units are occupied by folks that have lived in Gloucester before they moved to those units. So whether they were renting somewhere else and moved to rent there, or I've heard anecdotal stories of folks that were downsizing and looking for, for something that had amenities managed, not to have to deal with a lawn and those types of things. So it's a good, it's a good portion of the population there that came from within Gloucester.
But a third or 2/3?
A third.
Okay. All right.
I've got a
ahead.
follow-up question on that. So out of the 30 units that are metropolitan affordable,
Yeah.
at those units, do you have any data in terms of the occupancy of those 30 units?
I'm not sure I can share that. I think I'll ask that question before I could.
Okay.
But I can
You're
certainly
probably
tell you
correct.
that there are definitely folks from within the community that are in those units. I'm just not sure about percentage.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you if you can indulge me, because I know this will probably come up in potential questions later. But as you know, the story that appeared in the paper about the transit-oriented districts, I don't want you to go into a big explanation of this, because I know that it's still currently being reviewed at the state level. And we talked about the fact that they're still entertaining questions and issues from various cities, and also that is not part of our discussion on these amendments moving forward. But can you give a sense of what that means in terms of how
Sure.
these, let's just give us a
If
2
you
minute.
want, I can rip the Band-Aid off and I can put up a slide.
There you go. Go for it.
Okay. Because I will need to, and whether it's also, whether there's going to be technical assistance from DHCD to also help with the messaging on that. There is a requirement that every city council, every town select board needs to be presented with this information, whether that's by myself or with assistance from the state this spring. And then there are other milestones that are set associated with it. But I'll just try to give you a preview of what that is all about.
Just a clarification that the zoning amendments before us right now were in place or were in motion before this came up.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. I think
not
this is clearly a reflection of, and again, perfect clarity. The housing production plan was initiated by the city, but I don't think some of the goals are limited to the city, clearly. As a region, the state recognizes the housing shortage and is, 351 communities get to decide how they deal with housing to a certain point. And the relief valve is Chapter 40B, when somebody produces housing or proposes housing that has the inclusion of affordable units at 25% of a total project. They get to go into that community and say, I see what your rules are, but the state has identified that there's a need for housing and particularly affordable housing, and here's what we'd like to do. So here's how we're going to diverge from your rules. So I think this is a reflection of that the state is looking to go further with encouraging communities to try to address housing in general, but also affordable housing. And so there were amendments passed last year to Chapter 40A, which is what enables our local zoning ordinance. And they created what was called a provision for MBTA communities. And I'll put up a slide. So they have really kind of placed a focus on communities that are supported by public transit. And they are not talking just about bus or subway or commuter rail, or even adjacent communities. You might not have a stop in your community, but you're included in this, overarching legislation that is asking communities to really examine their housing in proximity to transit nodes, and have set up some goals and milestones that are tied into no longer carrots, but to a stick. If communities don't comply with the guidelines that they have just released late December and only did a presentation to communities, that's not a criticism. They said they were going to release them in December, and made a presentation just last week on how they see communities complying with the state law. So they've sorted it out by community, and they've set goals for capacity for housing in proximity to transit nodes. So there we are, Gloucester. We're in the very nice darker mint green. We have a commuter rail stop. Because we have a commuter rail stop, there are different requirements based on the type of transit you have in your community or whether you're adjacent. And this next slide kind of gives you a little bit more of the meat and potatoes of what this really means. They took every community's 2020 housing unit count of dwelling units from the census, and they applied a multiplier to it for folks with subway, 25%, folks with a commuter rail stop, 15%. So they came up with a number and said, okay, you have to create a multifamily district that allows multifamily by right, that has a capacity of 2,270 units. And capacity is a very important word in this discussion. It doesn't mean we have to generate 2,300 units. It means we have to have a district that has the potential, and existing counts towards that number. So it's basically like, as if it's not there, you have to have a district that allows for that number of units and also has some density requirements associated with it. So a district that might be created has to be within a half a mile of the transit node. It has to be a minimum of 50 acres, and it has to have a density of no less than 15 units per acre. And just for people's understanding of what does that look like, the R5 district has a density of about 26 units per acre. R5, if you allowed 3 units, based on the 3-family scenario. So I wanted to kind of ground it a little bit, that if you had 50 acres of land that could be carved up into 5,000 square foot lots, and you allowed for 3 units per acre, 3 units per 5,000, you're at a density of around 26 units per acre. So it's a little bit more complicated than that, because and this is part of the dialogue with the state right now in terms of how this will be applied and interpreted. When you create the boundaries of a district, potentially, what do you do with commercially zoned property that's embedded within that area? Does it get included? Does it get subtracted from the density calculation? Those types of things. But I will say, the proposal clearly, as it stands right now, with the overarching goal of having housing near transit nodes, clearly moves in that direction. But it was not something that was available at the time when that proposal was being developed. So that would have to be considered further. Again, bottom line, this is a local decision. There will certainly need to be further analysis as to what that would look like and what would be required. And ultimately, I know other communities and folks that work in other communities that have zero interest in this. And the impact is the stick part is the state has put limitations on funding sources that the community might be available from a granting perspective. Which again it's a local decision, but it does have a potential impact of competitive grants. It's not funding that we regularly receive as part of an annual allocation.
Just a clarification, and I when I first read this, the number 15,133, that's units, not properties, because we have about 13,000.
Yep.
Right, okay.
Yep.
So that was I was a little stuck on that number myself.
Yep.
Again, we're going to be dealing with this much more comprehensively later this spring when we get a little bit more detail going, but I did want Greg to sort of give a rough viewpoint on it so that people understood that, one, these things are not connected right now, and two, that I don't want it to confuse people about what is included in the conversation we're having about the amendments that are before us. So any quick brief questions, Val or Tracy, and then we'll just move on.
Yes, I'd like to go back to the zoning on the civic district.
Okay, why don't we
And
hang on for a
Rogers?
second on that? Just let's hang on for a second on that. We'll get into the general questions overall. Greg, did you have anything else in terms of presentation or questions to address? That's
what I had for a presentation for this evening.
Okay, I just want to pipe in here that I want to thank you for that. Greg has he has in addition to his duties as the planning director, the interim community development director, he answers to the planning board and to the mayor's office. And I appreciate all the work that you've had to put in to accommodate the questions that we've asked and the community have asked. And I'm sure that this won't be the last of them, but I do want you to understand how grateful we are for your thoroughness and your willingness to be patient and guide us through this process. So with that in mind, now we're going to dump on you with a bunch of questions. Tracy, why don't you go ahead? We'll start, I think, if we can keep it to a dull roar and again, limit this to questions that are before us, not the transit oriented design. I'm saying this more for the public. And when we get to the public questions or to the other counselors, let's make sure that these things start with a what or a why or a how, and not into a big long monologue, because we really want to stay away from deliberations right now. We really want to stick to informational questions and things that are going to make things clearer for people. So with that, go ahead, Tracy. Let's start with you.
Okay, Greg, hey, I'd like to thank you very much as well. I believe I've made this a little more difficult for you, if not a lot more difficult.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
No?
Nope.
Oh, good. Thank you then. Thank you for that. Can we go back to the Civic Center area slide for zoning? Yeah, the yellow part is the Civic Center, right?
Yep.
And that's where it's proposed that buildings can be built 45 feet high, but not by right. They would still need a special permit. Is that correct?
Yeah, there are a few, that requirement is in the multifamily dimensional table.
Okay,
So for multifamily of, in that district, essentially 4 units or more are reviewed by the city council.
okay.
Greg, oh, go
what if
ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so we're just talking about housing. We're not talking about anything else. Okay, so,
Well, we're
They-
talking
they-
about any one of the amendments at this point. I think you should feel comfortable asking questions about any of the 9 things that were
Okay.
in front of us.
okay, so, the multifamily in that area, okay, in the yellow area.
Yep.
By right can be 35 feet, but if we want it, if the developer or builder wants it 45, they still have to go before the ZBA, is that right?
So the use allowance is a different story. It's really just, it's about what the potential height of a structure could be. That, again, is really tied to multifamily, and the city council is the one that reviews 4 units or greater.
Okay. All right.
Just
What
for
if it's,
some
what if it's not a housing? What if it's not a multi-family house? What if it's just somebody
So
wants to
those-
build?
That amendment was proposed in the multifamily dimensional requirements.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the red area. That's Roger Street?
It's either side of Main Street and also the non-water side of Roger Street.
Okay, because that looks like Harbor Loop, right?
Harbor Loop is, can you see my cursor?
Yep, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
Yeah, so
yep.
there's Harbor Loop, so it's everything on the north side of Roger Street. It doesn't come across into the Marine Industrial District at all.
So that doesn't show the other side of Roger Street, like the right-hand side where the Gloucester House is. That doesn't show the other side of Roger Street.
Right, the CB district stops at Roger Street.
Okay, so that didn't even get colored in at all. Okay,
Right, so
Right.
the grayed area is just the street itself, and then the red is the area that's zoned
Okay.
central business, so it would just be that district.
And
Right.
all the
And-
purple is marine industrial.
Right,
got it, got it. So the red area is the same situation? The
it
zoning?
is in the multifamily tables, and that's where you would typically see a mixed-use project with some sort of active use on the first floor, and it's been applied to the multifamily table. So it's really dealing with that potential for residential above.
Okay, and that would also have to be, if they wanted to go 45 feet high, that would have to be okayed by the city council?
Yeah, so there's a use permit, and then there are dimensional requirements. So the use would still be reviewed by the city council. It just means that when a proposal comes in, they wouldn't be limited to a 30-foot height at this point.
When the
They would be
proposal
allowed to
comes,
propose something under 45 feet to you. And the discussion would be more about the use and the other impacts of the project, but they would have that allowance to start looking at multi-story rather than just being limited to 30.
okay, but that would still have to go through the city council then?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Greg, I'm intrigued to understanding that 6 votes are still required for the majority of special council permits, but 5 are now allowable. 5 affirmative votes to support a special council permit is in a new zone. Could you just look at this right now and tell us where that new zone is?
I'm not sure if I follow your question.
So my understanding
Are you
is
talking
that-
about the amendments themselves?
I'm talking about the council's rights to do a special council permit. Currently, you need 6 affirmative votes in order to support a special council permit. My understanding is that there is a district now that will allow 5 affirmative votes. And I was just asking you to describe what that district is.
I think, so there's a couple of different aspects there. I think the amendments to chapter 40A changed the threshold vote for certain types of amendments related to housing. So of the proposals, if there's a change to a dimension for multifamily housing, or there's the allowance of as of right multifamily housing. Those only require a simple majority. And I'll consult with Chip on this as well, because it's the first instance where we're having any amendments that fall under those provisions of only requiring a simple majority. But what you're seeing in terms of the 9 proposed amendments, not all of them require a 6-member vote in favor to pass. But it is those that are limited to multifamily, either dimension or use. So the proposal for the 3-family as of right, I believe, would only require a 5-member vote, and the increase related to height of multifamily would only require a 5-member vote. But I'll try to provide some clarity on that.
Great.
We're a little bit down the road from that in terms of getting to a council vote. But I'll
understand.
consult
I'm
with
just-
Chip to
I'm
make
just-
sure.
It's just important information for us to know, because there was obviously a reason why the state.
And again,
made
I would put
change.
that, yeah, I'd put that in the same context of the amendments to chapter 40A. The state is taking the position that, they, to some degree, as we get into the discussion of whether it's viable or not for the community to consider that district that we just talked about around the train station, the state was kind of putting those types of potential changes in a context of trying to promote them and make sure that they could potentially happen. So that's what they did with the lowering of the threshold. That is, that's an important consideration. The burden for a zoning change was very high with a 6-person requirement, a 2/3 majority. And they have changed that because I think they recognized that there have been a number of proposals that have lost by a vote. And, whether or not a simple majority is more appropriate for the consideration of some of these proposals.
Mhm. And it's probably connected to how the state and local municipality perceives the need for affordable housing, right?
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, certainly, promoting the further development of housing is a priority from the Baker administration for sure. They're the ones that developed the Housing Choice Program that is supporting communities either through funding towards projects or through technical assistance, to examine how you permit housing, and recognizing that there are a lot of barriers to the creation in our current zoning ordinances.
Okay, great. I think we might have lost our council chair, Councilor Grow. So I will continue the meeting until he comes back, because we still have a quorum of this standing committee. So, he'll be back in a sec. Good. So why don't we take this opportunity for me to review the dates and the times for the 5 board meetings, so we can just fill this with information. So the first ward meeting for these 9 zoning amendments, the first one is scheduled for January 26th, Wednesday, and that will be Ward 2. And that's Tracy O'Neill, and that will be co-hosted by Scott Memard, our Ward 1 City Councilor. And then on January 27th, 2022, Thursday, Ward 5, Sean Nolan, the Ward Councilor, will be co-hosted by me. On February 7th, Monday, Ward 3 will be Frank Marjota, and that will be co-hosted by Jason Grow. On February 9th, Wednesday, Ward 4 will be me as the ward counselor, and that will be co-hosted by Tony Gross. He lives in Ward 4 and he's at large. And on February 10th, Thursday, Ward 1, Scott Memard, Ward Council, will be co-hosted by Jason Grow. And so I just wanted to mention those dates for everyone's information and note that all these links will be on the city website. And I believe the Gloucester Daily Times will be doing an article just to make sure that the public is aware of these. And we hope that for those of you who want to talk more specifically about your neighborhood and ask your ward counselor questions and what is important to them in terms of these 9 ordinances, what zoning amendments, what they feel is positive and what they are concerned with and why. And that why is going to be very important for our discussion at those ward meetings. So anyway, I'll turn the meeting back to Councilor Grow. And
Wasn't expecting to be dumped out like that. And it took me ages to find my link to get back on. So thank you for jumping in there and covering that. I guess the question now is the will of the committee. Shall we've got, it's 7:06 now. We've gotten through this pretty quickly. Do we want to open up for a few questions if there are some, starting with the counselors that are on the call, and then open it up to the public with the caveat again that you know, each time we ask Greg to tackle a bunch of questions, we're adding to his overall workload. There's a lot of this information that's out there that can be found in the presentations and with the existing stuff that we have from the council already. I do want to try to keep it focused on the issues at hand so that we can work to clarify as opposed to engaging in a public hearing kind of environment. So with that, any objections to that?
no, I would support a time frame, maybe a half an hour.
Okay, why don't we start out with a half an hour? So that
It's
puts
been
us
a long
about,
night.
that's
And
right.
that we keep it to questions only on these 9 amendments.
That's exactly right. And I guess I would ask Greg, if you're comfortable answering a question immediately, then by all means, I think you can do that. If you feel that it's a question that needs to be thought through a little bit more, we can add that. We can take care of that way, if that's all right with you.
That sounds good.
Okay, because I don't want to end up just dumping another 100 questions on you. If we can satisfy the question this evening, and that will then be in the minutes, so people can resort to that and look at that or watch the recording. So with that being said, we've got three or four city councilors on the meeting. So why don't we start with you, Jamie O'Hara, Tony Gross, Jeff Worthley. Do any of you have any questions for Greg based on tonight's presentation?
I got it.
Okay, Jeff, we got you popping in there.
It is.
Yeah.
Hang on a second. Can you hear and see me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Audio. Okay. Well, I'll ask a
You know
couple
what you look
questions.
like.
Yeah, no one needs to see me.
Right.
A couple of questions, and thank you, Greg, for the presentation. I think we all are commending him for the hard work, and it's enlightening. So I appreciate that. And Jason, thank you for running this great meeting. Greg, you had said, and I might have heard it wrong, that there are 238 new units created in the last 3 years. Is that correct?
There are a lot of numbers. I
There were.
think
82.
What's that?
I thought it was 82.
Yeah, so in particular, I had the question forwarded to me from Tony Gross, looking specifically at conversions, 2-family, and conversions to 3-family from single-family homes to 3 and 2 families to 3 families. That total was 82 units since 2018. So it was just a little bit of a snapshot, I think, to get a sense of the conversions to
Okay.
3-family. It didn't take into consideration. I could dig further if there are any conversions to 4. I think it was probably more germane to, you know, what are we seeing in terms of you know, conversions to 3 right now as it relates to the potential that's out there.
Okay, so I did see there was a housing production goal of 435 units, and we come up with 238. That was, I think, total units, not conversions. Is that your best understanding of what you presented?
Yeah, so, well, so that in particular was multifamily units. It's just a little nuance. The state does only consider 3 units or more as multi. So we would be in that range. And I think, the big relief valve, I guess, to a certain extent, certainly was the Halyard Apartments. If you discount that, then we're, on the order of less than a couple hundred, but that's the big piece of it. Sure.
Okay. When you started today's presentation, you said this isn't necessarily designed for affordable housing. It's designed for housing. I think the thinking is that it would essentially maybe create more affordable housing by default.
No, I think I was pointing out that in the housing production plan effort, what we heard from people was not just about affordability. It was about housing types and housing supply.
Okay.
And so there's, clearly just increasing supply is not going to probably do a lot for affordability, but it was more about housing options. And that's why we've, the group that worked on the implementation committee, we've looked at accessory units, which are obviously a very different type of housing than traditionally single family and 2-family, and then also how we treat multifamily. So kind of across the board.
And as you develop, or as more properties are developed, do we have a way of measuring if they're affordable? I know we can sort of back of the envelope look at Zillow or something like that, but do we have a city municipal methodology to figure that out?
Yes, there is. The assessors do receive all of the information on arm's length sales. We have used that sales data for the development of the potential for a contribution in lieu for the inclusionary ordinance. Currently, as it was amended last year, allows for smaller projects between 6 and 9 units to potentially make a contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust. And that was tied to median sales of all, again, arm's length sales, and puts that contribution just over 400,000. So there is certainly the assessor's data and the registry have that information available as deeds are transferred and recorded.
Is it safe to
If
assume that would not
has a
assume,
mortgage.
right, okay. Is it safe to assume that would not include rental costs, rental rates?
It does not. That's a little bit more challenging, but in the housing production plan effort, MAPC did quite a bit of digging through not only realtor websites, people post in a variety of different places that they're renting properties. People post on Facebook marketplaces. They post on Craigslist. So they did a pretty hard review at the time also of what was potentially available and what kind of market rates were like at the time. Clearly there's also a lot of word of mouth rentals that really never make it anywhere publicly. So
For me,
it's
it's
much
not
more
just-
difficult to discern.
And for me, it's not how do we find out about it? Where do they advertise? It's sort of quantifying the problem and quantifying our solutions. It seems like an art project more than a science. We don't know how many housing units are going to be built. We don't know how many will be
Okay.
affordable. We don't.
Jeff, you
Right.
got a question in there? Because we're verging into deliberations here.
Sorry, I just wondered, can we develop a way to measure how effective we are at building affordable housing? And I don't think we need to answer that question right now, actually. I'm going to be very specific. On the R5 downtown district, the proposed changes, I understand that there's still building code issues that need to be met and all the other variables, but do we have a way of addressing off-street parking? When we changed the ordinance back in, 2003 to allow housing on second and third floors downtown, and I was on the Plan and Development Committee that did that, or was part of that, the ordinance called for if you are within a certain distance of a public lot, we're going to count that. And I raised the question, how can everybody count that? And the answer is yes. And I think that's what's happening. It's just an opinion. But does the new change say, and you need to provide for off-street parking?
So the only thing that the parking ordinance is not proposed to be amended as a part of this. So the current requirement per unit is still the current requirement. There's no allowance for municipal parking associated with the residential use. But it is also, it's a low requirement. It's 1 per unit. And so, I mean, very often if folks, we see a lot of proposals for 3-unit buildings with more parking than that, because it seems that the demand for off-street parking is higher. But that is not something that has been proposed to be amended associated with that change.
But that means that you still have to comply with the parking requirement in order to be free from going to the ZBA.
Correct.
Okay, good. All right. Anything else, Jeff? We'll move on to Tony or Jamie.
I have other questions, but they can wait.
Okay.
I'll
We got time is short, so let's
yield the floor.
Thank you very much. Councilor Gross, Councilor O'Hara, do either of you want to pipe in here with a question? No? Okay, in that case, we got a few people with hands up on the, boy, they seem to be very similar names to the ones we always get. We've got 4 right now. We'll go to those very quickly and see where we go from there. We'll start with Marcia Hart. Marcia, your question?
I was, can we?
We can hear you.
I was wondering if we can petition to be removed from the Metro Boston area income guidelines. And are there any benefits to us remaining in the group that we're in now?
Okay, that doesn't actually relate to what we're dealing with right now. But it is a valid question that I think we've talked about, whether or not we need to be looking at finding a way to get out of the Boston area, metro area, but that's a federal designation. So we'd have to approach Housing and Urban Development for that, I believe,
Well,
if I'm not mistaken.
Seems sensible to maybe do that since it's so far off from our median income.
Yeah.
And another question, can somebody research if this is correct? In the second planning board, one of the board members, I believe, said that banks aren't interested in providing mortgages to deed restricted properties. I happen to own one that was very concerning to me. I may have misunderstood it. I'm not sure, but I'm wondering if it's possible to find out, the city can find out from local banks if that's the case.
Again, Marcia, with respect, not really germane to the 9 amendments that we're dealing with here. So let's try to keep our.
I'm still trying to understand them, Jason.
Yeah,
I'm doing
I
the
understand.
best I can. So
I
these
understand. I'm just
these are
telling
the
you that they're
questions
not.
that I have and can formulate,
Okay,
and they pertain to the conversation.
they
So I have,
don't actually. So I'm going to ask you to stop now and move on to the next question. David Rosen, please. David Rosen, member of the planning board.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Ken.
Thank you for the presentation. I'll be quick. I have a few questions. They don't necessarily need to be answered tonight.
Okay.
Greg, in the presentation, it would be helpful if you could clarify the total number of non-conforming lots that would be subject to review and the total number of conforming lots that would not be subject to review under the new proposal. It's question number 1. Number 2, and you may have addressed this already, how many variants for height has the ZBA or the city council allowed, let's say, in the last 3 years? You may have addressed that at the previous meeting. I unfortunately missed that. The third question, why was the 35-foot height reduced to 30 feet in the past? The fourth question, how does the FEMA elevation affect the calculation of building height? A clarification, this is to Councilor Grove's question about the number of residents at Halyard, for instance, who came from outside of Gloucester. I just want to clarify that it was 1/3 that were Gloucester residents, but 2/3 were from outside of Gloucester in that development. And the last question is, would the new law that's being proposed by the governor affect both the West Gloucester train station and the downtown Gloucester station? So you can answer those offline if you'd like. But those are my questions, and thank you.
Just out of curiosity, David, why weren't these questions asked at the planning board level?
I think we went over some of these issues, but they're still not entirely clear.
Okay, all right, fair enough. All right,
I'll just
thank you
say,
very much.
I'll just say, those are totally fair questions. I mean,
Okay.
it's an ongoing discussion. And also, we have certainly presented the build out information in different ways. And this is the first time I think people have, I made that slide. And so it's the first time I'm sure anyone's seen it other than myself.
Fair enough.
So, I'll make that available. There are 2 columns, one that says total lots and one that says compliant. And that gets to David's point of, what would not require review. Again, I mentioned, if I'm not sure if you came on where that was on the whole meeting, of those subsets of compliant lots, there may be other constraints that would require them potentially to seek further relief from the Zoning Board of Appeals. It's not an exact science because of the location of structures on the lot. Good question about transit nodes. They have not provided guidance on that in particular. Whether or not the West Gloucester station also, I'm thinking it doesn't seem very reasonable, given the geography, and whether or not they're focusing on the main station, but it's something that they have not clarified yet. Again, not perfectly germane to the discussion tonight, but a good question and part of the feedback that we're providing to the state to clarify what's required. And I'm trying to answer many questions as I can tonight, but I don't recall all of them, but I'll be happy to circle back.
We've got them.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you. And by the way, I'm sorry if that sounded hostile. I was just curious if these issues had been brought up at the planning board level, which, because you guys have had this issue in front of you for a fair amount of time. Pamela Steele. You have any questions? Ms.
Yes.
Steele? Oh, you know what? I apologize. I kind of goofed here. We need your name and address for the record. And I missed that on the first couple of folks, but I'm sure we can find it. So Pamela Steele, name and address for the record.
Pam Steele, 10 Pilots Hill.
Mhm,
I
okay.
have, my question is at the end of my statement. It
No,
is
no,
a
your question, excuse me, Ms. Steele, your
Yeah.
question is at the beginning of your statement. and your
Okay,
statement is
okay,
reserved
good.
for the public hearing.
That's fine.
Okay, I'll be quick on the mic if you get into a speech.
Okay. Will precedent be set when a developer sues the city council because they're not happy with being denied a permit?
Counselor, I object to that question. I'm sorry. Point of
Okay.
order.
All right, objection. State your objection.
I'm just not comfortable with answering that question. It's speculation, and I don't feel it's relevant to the 9 matters that are in front of us on these amendments right now. So I hope you support my point of order.
Fair enough. Point of orders. Your point of order is in order. Do we have any other questions, Ms. Steele?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to Valerie Nelson. Name and address for the record.
Valerie Nelson, 7 Sunset Point Road. And first, I would really like to thank all of you, city councilors and Greg Catamatori. It's a great advance in information and discussion and the Q&A. And so I appreciate that. I also really want to applaud the support for these ward meetings that are going to happen, because what I'm finding out where I live is that probably the best judges of what these proposals would actually mean are from neighbors who've been watching development patterns.
Excellent. Let's get to the question, Val.
Yeah. Jason, let me thank you all, please.
Oh,
Okay.
you thank us very much.
No,
So.
I hope that you acknowledge, do you acknowledge, Jason, that the residents who live in particular neighborhoods, in particular zones, have a lot to contribute to understanding the impact of these proposals? Do
I
you?
do acknowledge that, which is why we're encouraging the
Thank
word meeting system.
do
But I
have
just
some-
want to, I want to get to as many
I have
questions
some
as
additional
possible.
questions, Jason, if you'll let me.
I know, and I want you to get to the questions because we have about 7 or 8 more people and
Let
we'd like
me-
to get as
Let
many in.
me, let me put them.
Okay.
I question whether separating the zoning amendments from the larger issue of what is happening in the neighborhoods and what we understand of what's going on is actually necessarily the right way to look at this. And a number of points have been brought up. Question, is it not true, Greg, that these new state requirements, you don't have to meet them necessarily in the half-mile zone if you have other areas in the city that could meet some of these density requirements? And I bring that up because it was also said in the paper that MAPC quoted, sometimes ideas make sense, but if there are no provisions that these units will be affordable, there's a problem there. I would encourage you all to look at like Cape Cod. They are coupling density with financial incentives to homeowners to make any additional units affordable. Will we look at that question? What about all this federal money?
I'm going to jump in here again, Val. That's about.
Listen,
Excuse
what
me, excuse me. Valerie,
saying
Ms.
is
Nelson,
that
Ms. Nelson, please. You're engaging in questions about the TOD district that is not germane to the 9 amendments. Please keep your comments and your questions to the 9 amendments we have going here, or we'll just move on with the next person. Are we good?
Jason, it is germane. How
It-
can the neighborhood?
I have in my infinite power as chairman of this committee decided that the TOD discussion is not germane to the 9 amendments we're faced with.
Well,
right
what if the residents of the city think differently? Are you open? to
We will
consider-
be dealing with the TOD in the spring, as Greg has mentioned. Okay,
And why not part of this?
because this is not part of the TOD discussion.
How can
We
you
have
assess
9.
the impact?
Okay, I'm going to move on to Sylvie. Can we move on to Sylvie, please? Sylvie, name and address for the record.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sylvie Corey, 28 Pine Street, Gloucester. Thank
Okay.
you for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks for joining.
So I'm curious of how much the city of Gloucester and the character of Gloucester is going to change because of the height of the buildings. It may block some views, reconstructing the housing from single to multiple family units. That's going to change also infrastructure of the town. We'll need definitely more parking lots. We'll need to think about sewage and how to deal with that. And also, that's going to change a character, which will be more like a metropolitan
All right.
city,
So
blending
can
with Boston.
I interject here just as I did with Valerie? We're going down the road of a position piece. So the question is, how much is this going to change the character of Gloucester neighborhoods and Gloucester as a whole? Is that the sum of your question?
Yes, that's the question, and also how it's going to affect our tax paying.
Okay, and how's it going to impact the tax rates? Okay. Anything else?
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to Patty Amaral.
Hello. Patty Amaral, 14 Myrtle Square. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, that was a lot of information, that's for sure. And remember, everybody, you can go back and listen to it again, because that's the glory of this, isn't it? So in your research, Greg, what data did you find that shows the impact on our infrastructure? Sewer, water, utilities? Our roads are very narrow, and I don't feel they can sustain this. So I'd love to see the data on that. I'm also a concerned person who lives at this train station, Myrtle Square. I can't barely get out of my street now. I can't even imagine adding more to my neighborhood. When I moved in here.
Patty, get to the question, please.
Okay, the other question is.
Council, may I just say something? I can't emphasize the importance of us not making this a public hearing.
Yes.
And it's not fair for the rest of the public that didn't think that we would be allowing deliberation tonight. That has to wait to the public hearing. So I love the fact that Councilor Grow is asking the public to ask questions about these 9 amendments. So thank you.
All right, go ahead. Patty, you want to get your questions out there?
Well, you know, the infrastructure, I know I have ADHD, so when that happens, I'm like, okay, what was I talking about?
That's okay.
Okay, before, you know, yeah, really, it's just, okay.
Okay.
Before we move on, we do need the data, and I think that we all need the data, and that would be a really good thing. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know. I guess
No,
I'm
fair
not
enough.
asking the right
That's a
question.
reasonable question. Okay, anything else? All right, thank you. Let's move on to Dennis McGurk. Mr. McGurk.
Hi, good evening. Dennis McGurk at 283 Concord Street. This time I'll remember to thank you for your hard work. This dialogue has been actually very informative and I appreciate it. Quick question, I hope. In looking at the bar chart that was up early on about the existing potential and then the future potential lots that could be built, I'm going to refer particularly to R30, 40, and 80. At first glance, the incremental potential changes don't seem significant. But in these zones, the new potential numbers of units do represent about a 40 to 50% increase over the existing units, somewhere in that area, and that's significant. So I got a question that's somewhat related to that. In your estimation, could the new regulations ease or release the existing potential in any way? Let me reemphasize that, the existing potential in any way. There's a lot of potential property units can be built. I didn't realize there are that many. Is there any way that the new regulations could ease or release that existing potential? And secondly, what is the goal, if we go back to the new potential, what is the goal of relaxing the zoning in those areas and adding new potential in these R30, 40, and 80 areas? Thank
Okay.
you.
Greg, do you have a handle on those questions?
Again, I think the evaluation was kind of across the board where there are different types of housing that and where the potential there could be for additional units. In particular, I think the larger lot districts, you know, there was that question, you know, posed not only by the working group and discussed through the planning board, whether or not it's an appropriate use in those larger lot districts for a 2-family. And is there the ability to have essentially 2 units on one of those larger lots? Again, curiously, 2-family is allowed by right and by conversion in the R80, but the R80 requires 4 acres of land to do that. So, you know, some of those questions were about, should this be a potential option provided for the properties in those larger lot districts that might look to create a 2-family? The potential that is created in a lot of instances is, you know, for a lot, again, that sits on either an acre or a 2-acre lot that currently doesn't have the potential because they don't have the land area to do it. They don't have twice for the district. Again, it would be up to the individual choice of somebody that's on a 30,000, 40,000, 80,000 square foot lot if they wanted to pursue a 2-family.
Okay, and then what would be the goal of relaxing the zoning in those areas, in the R30, 40, 80 areas? Is there a
I think,
particular goal?
yeah, I think in particular, creating that housing option for those property owners. 2-family is allowed. And again, this is, I see this very much as a discussion around 2-family allowance. That is front and center, and it has changed back and forth. Predominantly single-family district, we allowed it as a right for a period of time where you could do it in any shape or form. We ratcheted it back to only when you were converting, but had larger lot requirements in some of the larger districts. It's restrictive, and this is a proposal that would allow for more housing in those districts to create more housing throughout the community, and not just focus the discussion around housing in the downtown, but to see what the options are in other parts of the community.
Okay, thank you. Tough decisions. Appreciate your
Yep.
help.
Thank you
Absolutely.
very much, Mr. McGurk. Patty Page, we got you next. Patty, do you have name and address for the record and question? Yep, yes. Patty?
Are we
Going
in?
once, going- There you are. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought I did it. Patty Page, 3 Title Cove Way. Part of the background documentation in this is a data build out chart that came from Greg, I assume. And there's some terminology there I'd like to ask Greg about. The lands are colored and some of the lots are colored black for convertible lot and gray, I'm sorry, black for buildable lot and gray for convertible lot. Can Greg tell me what, I don't know what the definition of a convertible lot is, but why would some lots be considered buildable and some aren't? And if property is just not colored one of those two, can you explain to me what that means?
Sure, and again, there's no easy way to provide this data. It's that was, I think you're referring to the analysis that Gemma had provided at the planning board level.
Right.
So anything that wasn't in those two, just like, so here I showed an example of distribution of height and hues of pink, and it's kind of challenging to look at. Gray and black are not that much easier. Essentially, the conversion piece is those lots that already had structures on them that had the ability to convert to a 2-family or a 3-family. And the ones that had potential development, I believe, were lots that were vacant. Anything else that was of a different color, again, the lots were screened by land use code and by ownership. And so if there was something held by Essex County Greenbelt, we've done a lot of the development of the information in our GIS database around the open space planning effort as well, and really clarifying ownership in a lot of cases. So there were lands that were excluded from the potential because they either had some form of a restriction on them, utility ownership, or those types of things that didn't have the potential for residential use. And those lands that are zoned for commercial or industrial uses were also excluded from the analysis.
Okay, I guess what I would ask is these maps are just a generality and there's no, you're not tying each property to any of these maps.
Absolutely not. And again, there are other factors that might, again, we use the term potential, and there may be other limitations that prohibit them from being developed. And it is all about the choice of the landowner to pursue anything anyway.
Okay. And,
anything else?
Yeah, and then about motion 1 and 3, they seem tied together for me. Can you maybe, motion 1 is the R40, 30, 20, 10, R5 districts are going to be by right now. And then when you get to motion 3, you say the lot area dwelling, they're changing those lot sizes. What if one passes and the other doesn't? Can you explain to me that? I think they're really tied closely, and I'm not sure how, if you pass one, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to pass the other. I'm not sure I'm being articulate about this, but
No,
if you
I
pass
totally
one
get
and
what
you
you're
don't
saying.
pass 3, what good is it?
No, I think so 1 is related to use and 1 is related to dimensional requirements. So the impact would be if there were no change to the use allowance, every place that requires a special permit for a conversion, or every place, or in particular the RC40, there is no allowance for 2-family. The dimensional table is really about what's required for a 2-family. So it may allow for properties that currently can't consider a 2-family because they don't have the additional lot area requirement. So if we get to, when and if we get to that point when there's consideration of the council, there are definitely amendments that don't make sense for one to be amended and not the other, like the height consideration. if you don't approve any change in height, then there will not make any sense to make any amendment to section 3.1.6 or to a certain footnote. So some of them are interconnected. But I think the dimensional piece and the use piece are kind of separate. And it's possible that you could potentially change the use allowance, but hold the dimensional requirements static. So they are separate, but they are obviously related. If they work in tandem, they have a greater impact.
Very good.
And then I appreciate the clarification of what you talked about earlier, the MBTA and the TOD. That's an overlay. I understand that that is coming down later, but the basis of what your amendments here are, if you don't get that 45 foot in now, the TOD says it's going to be 45 foot by right in a big infill area and 60 feet by special council permit. That's where the 60 feet comes in the MBTA TOD, not in these. So I apologize that there was some, this is the problem of lay people just trying to pour through it. We didn't understand there were really two proposals. So that was really important to clarify tonight.
The TOD is not yet on the table anyway, so that's not even a proposal at this point.
I understand, but Jason, I know you made the comment that, we're not approving 60 feet and I know it's been thrown out, oh, it's not around. Well,
I didn't
that
actually
was
say we're not gonna do
confusion
that.
of the, no, that I understand. That was the confusion of the lay people trying to sift all this out. So
Okay.
that's where it came from. It came from the
Very
TOD, not here, but the basis of what you're doing is you're already starting to create the 45 foot by right that the TOD is going to base itself on to
Okay.
get to the 60 foot with a special permit.
All right, I'm gonna stop you there because I stopped Val on that subject. We will get into
Oh,
that in more
yeah.
detail when we actually have something to talk about. Because none of the council's seen this stuff, so we
Oh,
are in
I
the
know.
same position you are in terms of that stuff. But again, it's not germane to the 9 amendments that we're talking about right now.
No, I know, but
I'd like
it's
to
under
stay off
public
of.
comment right now till March. So I know we're
Right.
not going to talk about till the spring, but we got to
Yeah.
figure out as a community what to do about that.
Right, and we
one more
will when we
quick
do that.
question.
If you
Motion-
can make it very quickly, I got.
Motion 8, can you just, I don't understand this. Can you explain to me, increase by 1/2 foot for each foot by which building height exceeds 35 or 45 respectively? Can you just clarify that for me, Greg, what that?
Yeah, so there's the current ordinance has an additional setback for every foot above the requirement. That's also something to be considered in the future. Most of the buildings in the downtown area have party walls. And so that's one of those issues as well, that if somebody proposed an infill or redevelopment of a property on Main Street, for instance, and they were going above the current height limitation, they would be pushed into providing greater setback, which requires them to go to the Board of Appeals for a variance. So by starting to talk about that 45-foot height, if someone were proposing to exceed, there are other things that would have to be considered, including the council to issue a height exception.
Gotcha.
Great.
And
All right, I'm gonna,
motion-
Patty,
all right,
I'm gonna
one
stop
more.
you there.
Motion
No,
one-
Patty, I'm gonna
motion
stop
one
you
and
there.
motion three.
Patty, I'm gonna stop you there. You've had about 5-6 minutes of this time.
Oh, I know
I'm gonna
that, that's still in the public.
Okay, you got plenty of opportunity in the future. We can bring these up at the next thing, but I want to move on to the next question. Linda McCarriston. Name and address, please, Linda.
Yeah, McCarriston, 16 Quarry Street. Did you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Earlier this evening, Greg, in one of your, when you were looking at the red and pink and white chart, you said you had screened out floodplain and wetlands and other places like that. Did I hear that correctly?
No, you did not. I think when I was displaying the slide that had the pink hues, that was around height. But what I did say is that part of what was used in the analysis of lots and their potential, there is a requirement in the zoning ordinance for any lot to have less than 25% of the required lot area for the district to be non-wetland. And that was used as one of the criteria in looking at the compliant lots.
So you didn't say you screened out floodplain. If I were to play this back, that wouldn't be on the tape.
I don't know that, I mean, that's a resource area that we would exclude from the analysis.
Okay, okay.
All right.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Wow.
Linda, okay, very good. Did you have anything else very quickly?
Did I? No,
Nope.
no.
No, I'm asking you. You still there?
Yes, you're
Okay.
talking.
Yeah,
Yes,
sorry. I just wanted to make sure that you were done with your questions.
I was, thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, we got one final question. Sean Henry, please. Name and address for the record.
Not so much a question. Am I
But
there?
you better ask a question.
Well, I would just remind everyone that these, the entire list of amendments that we have proposed only fit within the existing zoning ordinances, right? That if you meet all of the other overlying
All right.
zoning requirements, you will be able to do what these amendments provide.
Okay. Do you have any other questions?
Nope. you can-
Okay, I'm gonna move on then. Thank you very much. I am gonna tell you folks, if you're unhappy with me for cutting people off, I'm sorry. I thought I was very clear that we were going to be narrowly prescriptive on the amendments that were being discussed. And these things can get very quickly out of control. We are trying on this subcommittee to elicit as much information from the public and their concerns, but this is something that we do at the discretion of the committee, and it's not typical that people get to sit in and ask questions, and even other city councilors, technically speaking, are not necessarily supposed to participate, and we're trying to allow that participation. But at the same time, I'm really just not going to let people dominate the discussion with stuff that is off topic and meant to speechify as opposed to ask questions. So if you are upset, I'm sorry that you're upset, but please understand that we're trying to do the best we can to get as much input from the community as possible, and that has to be managed at some point. So I think at this point, we don't have any more questions. We've run well past the time that we had allocated for questions. Does anybody on the committee have any further questions for Greg moving forward? No, you're all set, Val? Okay. So
Thank you.
Val's already outlined the public hearing, no, excuse me, God help us, the ward meeting process. And by all means, ward councilors are free to run their meetings as they see fit. We councilors have to be careful about deliberation within those. So it's really going to be a place for individual wards to have very individualized conversation with their ward councilors. I encourage you to do that respectfully and with the understanding that you're trying to come to a conclusion on based on what's best for your ward, and the ward councilors will then obviously bring that back to the city council as a whole. I encourage everybody to attend those meetings. If you want to attend other ward meetings, that's fine. But respectfully, if you're a Ward 1 resident and you want to attend the Ward 5 meeting, please by all means do. But remember, that's not me. That meeting isn't really for you. You're going to have an opportunity with the Ward 1 councilor to have his meeting. So respect the local residents in their efforts to have this conversation. And of course, the ward councilors can solicit as much or as little back and forth as they want. But I think as long as everybody's voices are heard in the process and there's a respectful dialogue, that I think they're going to be very helpful for people's understanding of the issues. With that in mind, we won't bring this up again until after the ward meetings have concluded, and we will then put this back on the P&D subcommittee agenda for further discussion as is warranted, and then possibly we'll discuss what the next steps are at that point. So I don't think we'll see this at the next P&D meeting, correct? Well, we don't have anything before. Ward meetings will be going on past our next board P&D meeting, correct?
That is correct.
Is that right, Sherry? Okay, so for all those at home, we will not be discussing this at the next P&D meeting. I don't think unless something comes up on the agenda for some unforeseen reason, but I don't anticipate that. And with that in mind, I will thank everyone for attending the meeting online and for your questions. And I will entertain a motion to, actually, first thing I want to do is again, thank Greg, but I also want to thank Gemma Wilkins. I haven't met Gemma, but she's obviously been an integral part of gathering this data and synthesizing it for you and for the public. So please let her know we appreciate her efforts as well.
Absolutely.
And then with that, I will.
Great
What's that?
addition to the, she's a great addition to the department.
Great, good to hear. We need more. We need more in your department. I keep saying that. I don't know if anybody can hear that, Mayor. But anyway, any motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Tracy?
Okay.
Very
Second.
good.
I heard it.
Val Gilman,
Yes.
Tracy O'Neill,
Yes.
Jason Grove. Goodness, yes. Good night, everybody.
Good
All
night.
right, thank you, Jason.
Everyone.
You all.
Thanks.